Hi everyone, traditionally Nemo here. Welcome to the Nemo & Co. conference halftime show. It is Sunday morning if you're in Utah, and it is Sunday afternoon if you're here in the UK. Welcome to all those watching at home. And let's get straight to the scores on the doors, shall we, with Jesus, Joe, or Russell? Okay, Jesus coming out on a slightly strong lead now on 36. Joe bumping himself up to 10. 11, sorry. Joe bumping himself up to 11. And then Russell M. Nelson on a solid 30 there. So, considering that it is meant to be a Christ-centered church, 6 points clear maybe isn't clear enough, but we'll see how the next session goes. It's interesting, actually, that Russell M. Nelson quoted himself twice. So, not sure how we feel about that, but and we could also talk about Elder Bednar and the fact that his talk was essentially full of Jesus quotes, but it was all one parable. So, in the words of Gimli, I think it still only counts as one. Let's introduce our guest today. You know him, you love him. It's PD. Hey, PD.
Hi everyone. Hey, how you doing?
Not bad, not bad. I got 4 hours sleep last night, so I'm feeling vitalized and ready to go.
Mate, I don't know how you did it because I just sat and watched that session and almost fell asleep myself. So, but I have listened to all of the halftime shows now. Doug Vincent, great job with Laura.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Yeah, awesome. So, and the Heaths for staying up as long as you did. So
They
yeah,
did.
props.
I would love to have it sung. Come listen to a Nemo's voice. I think we should submit that for the new hymn book. That's excellent, Ray. Thank you very much.
But the joke is the whole thing about Nemo is being Latin for no one. So come and listen to no one's voice.
Yeah,
That's kind of what
excellent.
church is.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's how we should be. Don't rely on me at all. I'd hate to think anyone out there is relying on me to talk any sense. Right? Should we talk about the general conference? Henry Byaring was conducting, and he's up 2 for 2 with Oaks. So it's a battle. They're going to battle it out to see who's going to do the final one. I reckon personally it's going to be Oaks because he can walk.
I did worry.
Byaring is shuffling about a bit. He's looking quite frail, bless him.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I'm reflecting on what we're doing here, and we go on about being soft on people and hard on systems and things, and we are not being.
Yeah, I'm not rinsing him for being old. Like I'm just
No,
pointing
no.
out the fact
I'm
that
just
he is, and
it,
their frailty is showing.
yeah, yeah. Let's go with that. It's in my head. I'm thinking all sorts of things that I just can't say, and I'm feeling bad. That's what it is.
Well, you keep them to yourself, lest we get demonetized.
Yeah.
And a man that you would love to say many things about, I know, is Mr. Jeffrey R. Holland, who gave us our first talk.
Jeff,
yeah.
You know what? When he first got up, I was impressed with what he was talking about because it's something I've never heard addressed before. And that is, why do Mormons not use the cross like traditional Christianity? And,
can we pause real quick? Because Doug's just pointed this out. Oaks disappeared for a bit during the session. His chair was empty at the rest hymn. Interesting. You mentioned something to me about that just before we went live. I just want to explore that a little bit before we actually dive into the speakers. I think that's worth acknowledging. He went somewhere. Does anyone know where, or does anyone have any ideas as to where?
Well, he was there at the end, and I can only imagine that he needed to change a nappy, or that's all I'm thinking when they waddle. I'm thinking of toddlers in. No, this is going the wrong way. Empty seats, though. Do we want to talk about empty seats?
Absolutely.
Briefly, because so it got me thinking at the end. I'd heard through the grapevine, Doug, that Oaks was missing at some point, and I thought, would there just be an empty seat that represented Oaks? Which led me to think, if this is really Christ's church and this is the conference for the whole church, then Jesus would be there. But Jesus has a physical body, so he couldn't just be there kind of floating creepily over everyone. They'd need to leave him a seat, and a seat for Heavenly Father as well, because this is the most important meeting for those guys, like every 6 months, like it is for us. So then they get the catch-22 is, do they leave 2 empty seats for Jesus and Heavenly Father? Because they'd need seats for their physical bodies. But then if the seats remain empty, does that mean it's not their church because they're just not there?
There you go. Hot take. Let us know what you think in the comments. So, on to Elder Holland, which Doug makes a really interesting point. Doug Vincent, again, he's coming up with all sorts in the chat. The church did use crosses until the 20th century. Holland was wrong. I have pictures of B.H. Roberts' gravestone, and it has a cross on it. B.H. Roberts, the man responsible for Rough Stone Rock.
Yes.
No, that's not Bush. No, studies the Book of Mormon.
That's yes.
Yeah, that's Richard Bushman is Rough Stone Rolling. I am still hanging around in my jammies. Yes, Danuk. So yeah, he gave the typical us versus Christians talk. He that story he gives at the beginning, he kind of acted like a cult member. He did that thing where someone talked about his thing, and he just went off on one. And I kind of got why he did it, to bring himself in. But yeah, your thoughts?
He acted like the classic, how do you know when someone's a flat earther? They will tell you.
Yeah.
How do you know when someone's a card-carrying member of the cult? They will tell you at every opportunity. And yeah, he drops in, when I was at grad school studying American religious history, at which point I thought, that's just an oxymoron. Because how can you be at grad school studying American religious history and yet support the Book of Mormon? I guess, yeah, if you only go back a couple of 100 years in history, but kind of the Book of Mormon rides roughshod over the history of the continent in a big way. So I thought that was weird. But yeah, he was telling the story about his friend asking him why we don't use crosses. And he started down a road of, well, Jesus said this, or, you know, this happened, and then Nephi said this. And he said his friend, his eyes just glazed over, and he ran away, basically, to an imaginary appointment. And then
his
he
friend
said,
may have genuinely had an appointment. It seems like Holland was the one that was being a little bit socially tone deaf in this situation.
Yeah, well, maybe Holland was bored himself, and that was the assumption that he made when his friend looked at his watch. He was like, well, he must be bored too, but I'm going to carry on. But I thought it was interesting. He mentioned the word iconography. Why do we not have iconography? And I thought, well, we do. So it's been pointed out that people did use the cross. But what about Moroni being an obvious one on top of all the temples? Just like on top of all the churches, you have a cross. On top of all the temples, you have Moroni. We have the sun, the moon, the stars down the side of every temple, or in you know, all this symbology. And it might not be as in your face as a cross, but we wear CTR rings. We wear, you know, young women's achievement pendants, and all sorts of things that they want.
Temples covered in iconography.
Yeah, you know,
Star of Melchizedek, sun, moon, stars, the all-seeing eye. Yeah.
And I'm like, then I got to the point where, why do Christians wear a cross? They wear it to remind themselves of their commitment to Jesus. Why do Mormons wear garments? They wear it as an outward expression of an inward commitment.
Okay.
I'm right.
Things.
An outward expression of an inward commitment. And I'm like, it's the same thing. But yeah, he just
B.H. Roberts' grave, for anyone that's interested.
There you go.
Cheers, Doug. The thing I found interesting was you were saying 300 years there wasn't crosses until the 4th or 5th century, and then he made some derisive comment about our origins go back before creeds and councils. We're not Catholics or Protestants. Hang on. We're not Protestants. We are. at least our church cultural traditions, our church worship traditions on a Sunday are very low church. They are very Protestant. The way we sing hymns, the way our chapels are laid out, all these things. Yeah, we're certainly not Catholic, but we very much follow Protestant faith traditions. The early church, and if you read apologist work, a lot of the major arguments apologists will make about the presence of other religious traditions is that essentially what was going on was Joseph was taking the best of everything he could find and he was making it all work. But what Jeffrey R. Holland here is doing is making a purity argument to the origins of the LDS Church and its gospel and its iconography, because he's not just talking about our beliefs, he's talking about the symbols we use.
Yeah.
And a lot of our symbolism, actually, a lot of what we do, a lot of our actions are all taken from Protestant traditions. So he may have a post-grad degree in American religious history, but he's wrong.
Yeah, I kind of feel like he said there, it's like me saying I've got a beat up old jalopy outside, but it's a Ferrari. And however much I say it's a Ferrari, it's not going to make it a Ferrari. However much he says that the Mormon Church or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it started with Adam and Eve. So our roots go back all the way to Adam and Eve. However much he says that, it's not going to make it so. So I think that's what he was going for, though. Just kind of,
we are the OG Christians. That was his thing.
Biblical roots. So, but he said that he gave a couple of reasons why we don't use it. He said the crucifixion was brutal. He said that the church is not generalized Christianity. So he's talking about general Christianity, they use it, but we're special Christianity.
Oh yeah.
So we
There's
don't
been a
use
lot
it.
of aren't we special in this conference?
Yeah. And then he said something that is classic Holland. He said the ancient origins that we just spoke about are evidence of the truth of this church. Okay. And because he's always going on about evidence, isn't he? The evidence for this book that you'll have to climb over and whatever. And then I felt like he just gave the snake eating its tail there, because he said ancient origins which can't be proven are evidence to prove the truth. So, yeah.
I want to point out what Vega Dog says here. Ignatius of Antioch died in 108 AD. If anyone denies the cross and is ashamed of the passion, let him be to thee as the adversary himself. So there's an example of someone before 4th or 5th century talking about the cross and denying the cross, not the crucifixion of Christ, but the cross itself as an icon, as a symbol. Interesting stuff. Holland's just not great with facts and figures, it seems. But he did at least give Thorvaldsen credit for the Christus statue.
Okay.
At least he did that. But he said a true Christian cannot follow the master only when they agree. And again, there we're seeing the master, Jesus, is essentially conflated with the church and its leaders.
Yes. It's the yeah. Did you pick up what he was talking about with King David and the wood? Because I thought this was very good. So he spoke later about first he went on to the miracles of Jesus Christ and his mission, that we should concentrate on the miracles and not the cross. Then he went on to integrity and morals, and us taking up our cross through service, which seems to have been a massive theme running through the whole of conference so far. Then he specifically started naming people who are having difficulties in life with mental illness, and then he mentioned LGBTQ and said that he weeps for them and with the consequences they're going to have to face for their choices, which I thought was a little bit rude. But then he got to King David, and I thought this was just a bit rich, because the example of King David was that someone offered him some free wood for the fire, and he said, no, I'll pay for it, because the example was not to offer God that which cost me nothing. And I'm like, what does the church do with its hundreds of billions of dollars to offer to God? They take it in
But
donations.
no, hang on. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why they don't use any of that money to serve God, because in as much as you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God. So they don't give the money from Ensign Peak to serve God and as a sacrifice to God because it didn't cost them anything, because it's all come as interest.
Oh, we figured it out. Oh my
That's it.
gosh.
They can't use it.
How many ex-Mormon
And they can't. They
commentators?
also can't use that tithing money because, like you said, it didn't cost them anything. They just got given it, so they can't give it to God either.
It's King David
Solved
all
it.
along.
It was, yeah. How, like you said, how many ex-Mormon commentators have been wrestling with this issue for ages? PD and
Yeah.
Nemo, 2022, smashed it.
There shall therefore be no more ex-Mormon podcasts from this moment on, because we have just answered the
That's it.
mystery of the universe. Why does a Mormon church not spend its billions?
Yeah. And if Daniel Peterson says this publicly, I'll be going after him for copyright because that is my idea.
It'll be in Fair Mormon next
If it's
week.
on Fair Mum, if Scott Gordon is watching this, you can't have it. That was my excuse. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah. But yeah, go on.
He talked about his apostolic witness. I want to know what that means. Does anyone have any idea what those words actually mean? What is different about his apostolic witness to anyone else's witness?
Well, I've heard this a few times so far in this conference. When they speak, they either speak of an apostolic witness, or they speak of the literal, he lives. And I'm not talking about, when you sing he lives who once was dead, and you say it flippantly, kind of just off the cuff, but they look down the lens and they say he lives. And to me, that's like that's them doing their special witness bit, where they've had the burning in the bosom, the curry testimony. But yeah,
I mean, Goatee McGoatface says he means that if he says it, you have to believe it. Simple. I feel like that is how it's intended to act, particularly because he thanked people for their loyalty. He thanked those of us watching for our loyalty to him. It's like,
little did he know.
And someone's in the comments saying Quinton L. Cook's going to start to say, "Oh, I saw his face and know his voice." But Holland might still be staying in the vague camp. Sorry, what were you going to say, PD?
I was just going to say, how many people do you think watch it like we do, or just wait for the halftime show? So that's cool. But do you think like all the protesters outside gather around a little 1980s kind of tube TV with a screen this big on a wooden box that they stole from Sister PD, and they're all kind of warming themselves at a fire watching
like a burning oil drum?
Yeah, going like, oh!
I think so. All fingerless gloves,
yeah,
and shopping trolleys. That's what they're up to. But we're cool. We're sat here indoors in the warm, and you guys are all enjoying it. So it can't be too bad. I don't think his thing was just blessings follow if we just keep struggling. It was kind of half stay in the boat, half aren't we better than other Christians?
Yeah, and I think they've come close on a couple of occasions to saying, here's what other Christians are, but here's what we are. And especially with the first talk from Oaks, it's really kind of, especially when we get later on to Nelson and different things, definitely starts to elevate the membership above the rest of the world and kind of separating the wheat from the chaff.
I think the LDS Church is doomed to do this personally, because in many conversations I've had with people about the problems with the LDS Church, particularly its leadership and with some of its doctrines and its policies, what comes up more than anything is we get to a point where it's like, well, okay, you're a Christian, fine, but why do you need all this extra bump? Because all the problematic things you find about the church are fairly unique to the LDS Church. So why don't you just go find Christianity elsewhere and get out of this? And so I think what they're having to do is they're essentially having to double down about what makes them different and why people should stay with them, because I think they've realized there is a trend of people either leaving and then going to other churches or just becoming atheist, or going to other religions, I should add. But there's people leaving, and they've got to brag about their USPs.
Yes.
They've got to brag about their unique selling points, because otherwise people will realize I can get Jesus elsewhere, and I can get Jesus at a higher ratio of 36-30 with the leader of the church.
36-30.
Mm.
But don't you think that? Sorry, my lights are going nuts.
Right.
Don't you think that that's how they will keep people, by blowing smoke? Because they're on this. The message has gone from the rock cut from the mountain without hands, rolling forth and filling the world, to a peculiar people. Because what was predicted in the 70s and 80s started to happen in the 90s, and then the internet came along in the early 2000s and totally blew it out of the water. So now we're a peculiar people, and those peculiar people, we are going to just big up. We're going to separate them from everyone else. We're going to isolate them, and we're going to just try and make them, we're going to love bomb them into staying.
I think I've come up with a name for that bar stool that they've put out for Russell M. Nelson. I think it's called the Rammy-umptum.
The Rammy-umptum.
Because as Robert B points out, we are so thankful to be better than anyone else, and aren't we amazing and special? It's kind of what those that went up to the Rammy-umptum were being told off for doing in the Book of Mormon. So great point, Robert. Thank you. We're going to call that little stool that Russell Nelson's sitting on the Rammy-umptum.
Yeah, and let's come back to that whole story of the Rammy-umptum and the temple, and the poor people who couldn't dress nicely, who weren't allowed in. Come back to that
for Captain
of
Earlodes.
Susan. Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Well, we'll go on to Sister Denner's, which, let's appreciate that in every session, one woman has spoken. Which I think if they do that in the 5th session as well, that might almost be a record for conference, which is so sad that is what constitutes a record. And two praying. But you think, how many women can they have? What have they got? They've got Primary, Young Women's, and Relief Society. Yeah, as general officers of the church. There's 3 people in each of those. Yeah.
But at the end, as they all leave, you can see all the wives just sat on the end.
Yeah.
So there's at least 15 there.
Yeah, no, but in terms of like people that
general officers of the church.
General officers of the church, general authorities and general officers of the church, which is they always say with speakers selected from general authorities and general officers of the church. That's the bump by the bloke from Bonneville Distribution. So if that's our catchment, for the sake of argument, we've had 6 of the 9 already. We'll probably get 2 more. So who's the one that's going to be left out, I wonder?
Well, yeah. Well, no one knows, do they? We'll see.
If we get another woman praying and another woman speaking, if not, we might have 2 left out. But still, 6 out of 9 is fine. We're still hoping on Wendy giving a talk. That's one of the predictions.
I am missing Wendy.
That would be excellent. I would love to hear that. Sister Dennis was the first one to really come out with primary voice, which I was having a discussion with Jane from 21st Century Saints about primary voice. And it's frustrating to me for a few reasons. In that poll for the chat. I don't know how to actually put a poll in the chat, but poll for the chat. Is primary voice just a Utah woman's accent?
No.
Because if it is, I'll wind my neck in. I'll be like, okay, right, that's just how they speak, and I'm being a bit of a snob. But if that is a way that they are speaking on purpose outside of their normal voice for some sort of effect, and that effect is aimed at children, and that's how they've been taught to speak to children, then why are they speaking to the general membership of the church like that? Why don't they use their own voice, their own authentic voice? And if they don't feel like they can, that's even worse, arguably. PD, what are your thoughts on that?
Now, I didn't want to get involved in yours and Jane's kind of thing. Okay. But I did have an opinion. Hey,
Okay.
Jane, I know you're in the chat. So the opinion is, having served as a proselyte missionary, I don't know what it was like for you, Nemo, because I know you were at a temple and there would have been lots of old people there
Yes.
and not so many missionaries your age. But you did serve. Did you serve in the office as well? No.
Pardon?
So
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
okay, so you'll have known some missionaries your age, but when missionaries start to either bear their testimony, some
Mhm.
of them yet go into this kind of mode where everything gets really intense
Mhm.
and really expressive, and they really, really mean it.
I've done it when I've been the
And
voice of God behind the veil.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really used to annoy me, really,
Mhm.
when I'd go to zone leader council and a new zone leader had been called, and it was someone that I knew from other times in the mission. So I know their voice very well. I know their casual voice. And then
Mhm.
they come in and they're really kind of hyped up on being called as a zone leader, and they're asked to say the prayer. And
Oh, yeah.
the guy who gave the opening prayer to this session constantly kind of it's that sickly sweet caramel voice. So I don't think it's just a sisters thing, this primary voice. We can label it primary voice, but I don't think it's just a sisters thing. I think
No, no.
brethren do it as well. And some of the senior brethren I think have spoken that long that they lost the caramel, but you can definitely see it when some of the less senior brethren step up to kind
Mhm.
of make their take their place and make
Yeah.
their mark.
But I say long live people like Tracy Browning who didn't do that and who actually just spoke in what seemed to be her normal voice, in her
Yeah,
own voice.
and she
Excellent.
must have been so nervous because she has been thrown in 6 months ago at the last conference
Mhm.
into the primary presidency as a black woman. So she is already a big, you know, kind of shock in this very racist environment, that this culture of racism that has been going on. You know, they like to forget it now, but
Mhm.
it's not a Mandela thing. It actually happened. So she must have had a lot going on with that. And then they say, "Can you speak in conference?" So I
Yeah.
think she did amazing
I think she did
to
excellently.
deal with that.
Jane's saying in the chat, I've never heard one example of a man being criticized for primary voice. That's because men don't do primary voice. They do something, they change their voice, they go into a mode of speaking, but they don't do primary voice is specifically that voice that the sisters do. To the way I've heard it talked about. So that's like, that's like saying women don't get criticized for having beards in the church. It's like, well, because women don't grow beards
Fine.
generally.
You guys are
Um,
gonna keep going on that, but
but no. I just thought that's worth pointing out, and criticisms can and should be leveled at the way that the men address us as well, in terms of the faux crying, for example, that we get from a lot of the brethren, the
yeah.
fake tearing up, all that sort of stuff. So, but I think primary voice to me seems to be something that comes out of the general officers, the sisters, and Sister Dennis was using it to full effect when she was talking about Cassie the hunting dog. What did you make of that?
So I've got a little hunting dog, and we don't hunt, but she's a hunting dog. And
Mhm.
the story was that he was really proud of this little hunting dog called Cassie. He went on a hunt and he took his friends with him so they could see how good Cassie was at hunting. And I
Mhm.
can only expect that it's some sort of retriever. I've got a little spaniel, kind of a pheasant duck hunting retriever. And at the end of the hunt, when it was time to go home, he was trying to call Cassie to come back into kind of jump up into the cab of the truck, and she wouldn't move. And he got really upset at the fact that the dog was disobeying him, and his friends were looking at him as if to say, "Oh, look, your dog doesn't do what you say." Whereas if this is the end of the hunt, the dog probably did everything he said before and is now being judged on this one time that it didn't want to jump in the truck. And
Mhm.
apparently, when he went to pick up the dog, he realized the dog had a large gash down its chest to its breastbone, and a large gash down its arm or leg. And that's why I didn't want to jump in the truck. But he was judging the dog badly, but for not wanting to jump in, but he didn't know what was actually going on. And that was what her whole point was. We shouldn't judge others when we don't know the reason for their not being able to wear the best suits on a Sunday or the nicest dress if they show up in jeans to church. I thought it was just a whole kind of poke in the eye for purity culture, and basically said, wind your neck in and worry about yourself, not judging everyone else.
I think so. Basically, that was my main takeaway from it. Don't judge others. She was a shout out to those difficult situations people find themselves in, including single mothers or fathers. So they've had 3 mentions this conference,
Wow.
which is good because they used to not get any sort of mention at all. So those people are going to feel at least seen, which is nice. She talked about those questioning faith. Then glossed right over what any of those questions may be, because that is the standard procedure. We
Don't
talk
wanna
about the
do
fact
that.
that people have questions, but we can't talk about what those questions are. It was a nicey talk. It was just be nice to other people, guys.
It was, and I want to give her full credit for for the talk, for the fact that her hair seemed to be just natural, for her stage in life. It was gray. How many times do we see? Well, at the end, we saw the camera pan to the wives of all of the apostles, and they all had kind of raven or really dark hair. And I just thought it was refreshing for a sister to get up who wasn't fake.
And I want to point out the reason I like that is because I feel like if those sisters want to dye their hair, that's absolutely fine. They can do that. But I can't help but think there is an element of pressure for them to look a certain way.
Yeah.
Especially when we look at the way that women are treated in general in terms of the church's standards up until the strength of youth has just changed. Essentially, it was Utah's got some of the highest rates of plastic surgeons in America per capita, right? So plastic surgery is acceptable because it seems to fulfill the beauty standards of 50s conservative America. But second piercings and tattoos don't fulfill those beauty standards of that conservative American view. And so they're not acceptable. And so I can't help but think that bleeds over into how apostles and prophets want their wives to look and how they want them to be presented.
Yeah, and I guess let me put it this way.
Mhm.
How many of the apostles and prophets get up to the stand with their hair dyed, and with all of these alterations in order to make them look better in their opinion or in the opinion of others? They don't. They get up, all their wrinkles, all their gray hair or their balding heads or whatever, and their wives have to sit on the end as kind of trophies, all done up with their finery. And I'm just like, it was refreshing for a sister in
Yeah,
leadership
I agree.
to stand up just looking natural, not having to play up to that kind of Utah stereotype. So maybe I sounded wrong when I said it first, but
No,
that's what I'm
no.
going for.
Yeah, no, I totally got that's where you're coming from, and I
Yeah,
wanted to put that out there that I agree. I don't like the fact that a lot of that may come from pressure on those women.
yeah. But
And it was
my
refreshing.
my last point with her
Mhm,
was she spoke about Jesus forgiving the lady who came to him, the prostitute that came. I think she was a
mhm,
prostitute, and he told her to go away and sin no more. And she was saying that's how simple it is, and that no one judges anyone, etc., etc.
mm,
But then in the actual church, you have your judge in Israel, your bishop, and it's not that easy.
mm,
If you came forward with those things, even if we came forward now, he wouldn't say go away and sin no more. We'd sit down for hours and hours and be berated.
mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, someone makes a good point in the comment. The parting in Bednar's hair is certainly unnatural. So, he is doing something um of the kind. Before we go on to Elder Gong, who actually gave us some insights into his personal life, I want to talk about these. We've all been talking about these by now, but these are candles. And they're great smelling candles. and they're by the EXMO Candle Company, who's actually in the chat. So ask them questions all about their candles. I've got my Lazy Learner candle burning right there, pointed to it right. It's only the 4th session, and I finally got it correct. That is burning away to remind myself that I am indeed just a poor lazy learner and I know nothing at all. And the other thing we need to talk about really quick is the patrons that support this channel, because, I basically said to them, if you give me money, I'll tell people who you are. So these are the patrons in the second anointing tier. Count Kolob and Patti Madsen, thank you very much for your donations, and thank you to all the other patrons as well who support this channel. There will be a after show on the Patreon, because I'm a sucker for punishment, and I'd love to spend some time with you all there. So if you are thinking about joining the Patreon, do it, because it'll be good fun. Right, that's me done trying to rustle up money from people. PD, Garrett W. Gong. Happily ever
Gong.
after.
Gong, yeah, he asked, do you remember when you believed in happily ever afters? And then basically segued that into the plan of happiness, plan of salvation. And speaking about how we enact the plan of salvation in our lives, and gave a couple of examples of that basically Jesus Christ is powerful enough to heal all conflicts. And he spoke about families who had conflict and didn't want to be together forever. And, a particular young lady who didn't want to do her father's work because she didn't want to be with him in the eternities, and basically said that just do it because you will have 1,000 years in the millennium to work that out. And I thought,
Yeah.
if it takes you 1,000 years to work out if you want to be with someone or not, you don't want to be with them. But that was a very quick nutshell of his talk.
Yeah, let's go through it. He
Go.
said, no family is perfect, and there's sometimes friction, hurt, and profound pain. And I can't help but think of the photo that his son posted of him, his partner, and so for those that don't know, Matthew Gong is Garrett W. Gong's son, and he's gay. And him and his partner went for a dinner with Elder Gong and Sister Gong, and they took a photo together. And then when they pulled up on the drive, they got home. Elder Gong said, "Please don't post that photo online." And his son said, "Oh, why not?" He said, "I wouldn't want people to get the wrong idea."
Mm.
And that caused a bit of a breakdown and a bit of friction. And Matthew posted it online, so that photo is available online. And so I can't help but think Garrett W. Kong talking about no family being perfect and friction, hurt, and profound pain. I don't think he likes the position he's in with his son. I can't think of many parents that would, unless he's so church broke that he views his son as a worthy sacrifice to his position. But I would hope not. I would hope that this does cause him some discomfort. And I would hope that that may cause change amongst church leaders. But he then carried on this theme of talking about the sort of more niche positions, those that don't have the perfect life, which is great. I love that. I love when we don't just hear about so and so from Utah 789th Ward who lost their keys and prayed and found them. We hear about the proper issues. He talks about people who don't want to actually be sealed to their family forever. He talked about a girl who didn't want to be sealed to her father and do the temple work with her father. And then he said after about a year, she thought about it a bit and then decided she wanted to go on to, and then her dad appeared to her in a dream.
Yes.
And it's like, I wanted a bit more actually about how she came to that place where she was all of a sudden reconciled with the fact that she didn't want to be with her father for eternity, and now she does. What has brought her to that place other than just pressure from the church to be sealed to her dad? I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
I think it comes down to the rules, or you could say framework that he gave. He gave 5 rules. Okay. One, well, 5 points to live by. One was to understand the resurrection, that we would all be resurrected. The second was to understand the atonement, and the way that that would work in our this life and the afterlife. The third was that God loves perfectly in an equal kind of mercy and justice way, and that everyone would be judged according to their works, which is amped up later on because a different apostle says a different thing about that. And those who choose to deliberately do wickedness will burn in hell. And And then randomly he spoke about mission standards. We are getting back to that young lady. But he brought up mission standards and specifically said to the missionaries to keep the rules. I don't know if there's a problem there with missionaries keeping rules. But then at fourth, he said, we need to become like God, be saviors on Mount Zion by doing temple work. And then fifth, this is the one that I think maybe he was talking about that changed that young lady's mind. That was the golden rule. And he said that was forgiveness and repentance. And that she needed to forgive her father and repent of her previous bad feelings towards it.
Okay. So that's where that's come from then.
That's just me spitballing.
Well, I think you could be right. People want to see this picture of Matthew Gong, so we're just going to pull that up onto here now. Here we go. Right, that's just loading. Because I think it's important. But while that loads, I think this was generally a temple work talk. What would you say to that sort of characterization of the theme?
No, absolutely. We got talk about ghosts and all sorts of things. You know, a ghost helped someone figure out that their great grandfather wasn't actually their great grandfather, and then the ghost turned out to be the great grandfather, I think. And I was kind of like, that's like an episode of Dynasty or something. So
here's the picture.
There we go.
So on the far left is Matthew Gong. Then next to him is his partner. Then you've got Elder Gong and his wife sat there, and they're at I believe, I don't know what kind of restaurant it is actually, but it looks tasty, whatever it is.
Chinese.
Yeah. So there you go. So that's the picture that Elder Gong didn't want the world to see.
Sorry, I didn't say Chinese because his name's Gong. They had chopsticks and rice. That was just an assumption.
Yeah, no.
Please.
I was trying to recall Elder Gong's ethnic background because I know that was a favorite restaurant of his, but I can't remember. I think he is Chinese. I think he's of Chinese heritage. So no, you'd be right to say that. He's interesting where he said breaking mission rules can't be the spirit because mission rules invite the spirit.
Yes.
How does that make sense?
Yeah, because he said, didn't he? Like, elders and sisters, you can't use that as the excuse. So you can't be like, I need to swim in the sea because there is a sailor waiting for me. See what I did there? But to teach them the gospel, but that's a mission rule. And we've had it already that personal revelation always agrees with the rules. And if it's not agreeing with the rules, it's not revelation.
But then that's so not in keeping with with the nature of the beginnings of the church. What is the
Nemo.
how can you say, right? You've got a missionary who's a strong swimmer, yeah, from before they were on their mission.
Okay.
And they are, as a friend of mine was, tracting near the beach or near the coast, right? A friend of mine says mission in the south of France. You can't really avoid it. So you're wandering around. A child is drowning. Not many people around. It's against mission rules to go in the water. What do you do? This is like one of those train track rules things, right? The spirit surely would constrain you to help the child, unless, as we've learned, it might be God's will that the child dies. And so then, I guess fine, just leave him.
Yeah, I think what you have to do at that point is you have to drop to your knees and say a really long prayer. And if you say it for that long that the child unfortunately expires, then that was God's will. But it's stupid. It's stupid. There's a spirit of the law and the letter of the law, but I don't think they want missionaries to be making that distinction. I think they just want them to be
the whole point of Jesus coming was to teach people how to use their own personal revelation and discernment and agency to work with the spirit of the law. Because the letter of the law is the woman taken in adultery should be stoned. And Christ went, well, he was without sin amongst you, let him cast the first stone. They're all like, all right, got me.
Yeah.
Where's that attitude gone? Where it's like, oh, no, you better be following the letter of the law because the spirit will have you following the letter of the law.
Yeah, and we already saw this in with Tracy Browning in the first session when she spoke about the Israelites getting that distracted by the letter of the law, they forgot the spirit of the law and what they were
Hmm.
waiting for. But
Hmm.
I think the missionary thing, possibly with the increased technology that they have for watching us and watching other things online, for contacting home. There are a lot of rules that are a lot easier to break now than there were when I was on my mission 15 years ago. So, wow, it was more than that. Oh,
Mm.
I'm old.
You're old.
But so there's obviously a lot more temptation out there, and I
Mhm.
can only imagine what it would have been like all that time ago had I had, everyone had an iPad or a phone to call home and
Mhm.
yeah. So
Okay, should we go on to Joseph W. Sitati, who is an interesting choice for speaker, given that he was released
two of them were
yesterday.
released.
Two of them, yeah. The other one was, it wasn't Lund, was it? Or had Lund
Yes,
been released?
no, Lund was the Young
No,
Men's General
Johnson.
President.
Paul V. Johnson had been released and then still spoke. So we had two people that had been released who then still spoke, which tells me that their releases were maybe not as planned far in advance as their speaking assignments. Um, which means then he, wasn't a general authority. So we just heard from a rank and file member of the church as far as
Yes.
that
Well,
sort of thing is concerned.
yeah, but you know what? He gave a good talk.
He did.
In the fact that I thought he set out very well. He started with day and night and spoke about patterns that we
Hmm.
could not affect, and
Yeah.
that every time we try to, it doesn't go well. He spoke about jet lag coming from Africa to Utah for conference, and that in a 24-hour period, he'd have to reset his body clock 10 hours. But the day night pattern he couldn't overcome. So I thought that was a good parable to get going with. And then he got into gospel patterns
Hmm.
and lost me a bit.
Yeah, I did get a bit lost in his talk as well, I have to say. He brought up holy habits, which is good. Um, but yeah, it was all just about, you know, a lack of humility is why people are leaving. The outside world isn't humble enough. We need to just be more humble. We need to just put off our own opinions and ideas and just submit to the will of the church leaders in a
Yeah,
nutshell. That
yeah,
so he's church broke, even though he gave a nice talk.
yeah,
Um, but fair play to him.
yes.
Yeah. Stephen J. Lund, on the other hand, that man went straight out and he was like, I love FSY. I love the fact that all the youth have been at these like indoctrination camps. That's essentially what they are.
200,000 of them,
Yeah.
you
He's like,
know?
it's amazing, brilliant. And he talked about we live in a spiritually corrosive environment. And
Yes.
so, we need to send our kids away. And later in the talk, he'll tell us about we'll never get them back.
Oh my gosh,
They're
Nemo.
never
Right.
coming home.
Right. I was watching on YouTube also whilst preparing a
Mhm.
meal for the family. I got a very sharp knife in my hand. At the moment that the words came out of his mouth, that the girls are not coming back, I almost chopped a finger off because I was like, in a church, an organization that has a pretty dodgy history
Mhm.
for, girls not coming back or being, taken into spiritual wifery, for
Yeah.
someone then to make such a large joke. They were talking about camp, and was it his well, one of the young women's leaders, state women's leaders, told all the parents when they were dropping their daughters off, say goodbye because the girls aren't coming back. And
Mm.
everyone was like, and their point was they're going to have a spiritual journey, so the same girls won't be coming back because they will be more spiritually blessed when these new girls return. But I
Yeah.
just thought that was well dodged.
Yeah. I also, it takes me back to something Sister Dennis said. I don't think we mentioned. She said, how many wounded individuals do we have amongst us? And my gut reaction was, well, we have plenty of abused kids, unfortunately. We
Yeah,
do, and the church's relationship with children at the moment is not great. Hence we've got the prophet of the church feeling like he has to get up and say something about abuse not being tolerable. he's having to make these big declarative statements about something that should be pretty obvious. We don't abuse children. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And so to be making remarks about, jokes about abducting children and things, even in jest, I know he was making fun of himself, and I know the point that his wife was trying to make, that they're going to come back as new creatures in Christ and all this sort of stuff. I get the theological metaphor to it. It's not great optics.
No, I thought it was a very in joke, but to the rest of us who maybe aren't so in anymore, it was a bit crass and tactless. But yeah, he ended on discipleship, didn't he? And the covenant path, and just reverted to type with follow the living prophet, not the dead ones, only the living ones.
And so someone reached out during and sent a message about how when they went on youth camps, so they're from a part member family, and so they came back very different, and their family weren't sure how to quite deal with essentially a heavily indoctrinated child. A child who comes back very, very firm about these sorts of church beliefs and church standards and the natural kind of judging of those. We've just had For the Strength of Youth as a pamphlet relaxed in some ways, but you bet people's shorts and hair were all still being measured at FSY when they were going.
Nemo, have you ever been to Disneyland?
No, because I was a poor abused child. No,
Okay.
I've never been to Disneyland. No.
Okay, Disneyland turns even the grumpiest adult into a child again. You go through these magical gates, and all of a sudden, Main Street USA smells of cotton candy. Every sense, from the songs to what you're seeing to what you're smelling, everything is bombarded in order to put you in this childlike place where you forget about the worth of money and just give it to them. And I think that's the same with FSY. I've seen, youth unsure about their sexuality. I know someone, she thought she was a lesbian, but she was going to go to FSY, and she came back loving Jesus, loving everything, and she totally kind of changed from the person she was before. But then after a few weeks, that wore off, and she went on that emotional journey again to find herself again.
Yeah.
And I think they just kind of cram them in like Play-Doh into a mold and just kind of squirt them out the other end and expect them to get on with it. But FSY over here in Great Britain, they had it in like August, and then in September they were starting FSY reunion activities. And I'm like,
so when we'll see their friends again,
isn't it a bit quick?
A little bit.
We just saw him 4 weeks ago for FSY.
Strangely quick, but I think they're trying to keep them riding the spiritual high for as long as possible. They're hoping that any 17-year-olds they've caught will put in their mission papers.
Yes.
They're trying to give them long enough to get caught into that. And then speaking of missionaries, the last thing Elder Lund said was to a missionary in the airport, when you go home, just keep doing what you were doing on your mission. So don't grow, don't develop, don't change, just keep doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
And that fails to recognize that, rightly or wrongly, a mission is a singular experience, a very singular and specific experience, and it can't be replicated in the real world.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
The real world where your employee expects you to be at a desk at 8 a.m. The real world where you have bills to pay and people to, young people to look after and feed, and you can't get up and do 3 hours of study every morning and then have a carefree, well, it's not carefree, but you go out and work for 12 hours straight, but you don't have to worry about bills. You don't have to worry about it's different.
Yeah, it's just a different world.
Yeah,
different
totally.
world. It is. And you know who else lives in a different world of mission rules where your parting must be strictly straight?
Of Susan.
Of Susan.
Of Susan
has entered the chat, which he started with parables, which I love, because That is the biggest get out of jail free card for when apostles and prophets lie. Well, it's just a parable, mate. You know, the airplane crash story that we can prove didn't happen to Russell M. Nelson. Just a parable, mate. Just a parable. We
You
don't
know,
like its parables.
you know what though? For me, when anyone
Mhm.
starts to talk with, "Let's talk about this parable," for me that is, I haven't prepared a talk. I forgot I was speaking today, but let's talk about the parable of the
Oh,
virgins, you
yeah.
know, or whatever. I just, yeah,
And then
parable.
he then qualified that whole thing about parables with the best get out of jail free card I've seen in a while. The intended meaning is not stated explicitly. It's up to the listener to ask, seek, and knock through their own moral agency.
Yeah. So
Now,
basically, go on.
when I hear them lie, okay, fine. He's telling me it's up to me, the listener, to seek the truth, to knock, to find out through my own agency. Well, I've done that and they don't like it. So that's clearly not what he's after. What are your thoughts?
I was just going to say, basically, he's going to stand there for 15 minutes. He's going to spout, and if you don't get anything from it, that's your fault.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
the same as a priesthood blessing.
Hmm.
I will give you a priesthood blessing, but it relies upon your faith to be
Exactly.
healed or
Hmm.
to die, you
Exactly.
know, but you've got to have faith enough to do either. So yeah, it kind of, yeah, it totally, it takes the heat off him, doesn't it? If he's given a crap talk, which he did, then, but there'll be some people, it's the good old, the person who gets up at a testimony meeting in November and says, conference was so amazing. I didn't think I was going to get anything from it, but oh my gosh, it was the best conference ever. And everyone else is sat there thinking, what are you on? It was crap.
Did we watch the same thing? No.
Yeah, yeah, but it's everyone gets something different, and that's what he was saying. But he was saying basically, you won't get the good stuff unless you've worked for it. So
Yeah. He mentioned DNC 121, which again is interesting, because you could level some of the accusations of DNC 121 right at the brethren that they're practicing unrighteous dominion. So
absolutely,
ballsy. Because whenever they mention these scriptures, because they tend to just quote each other, whenever they mention specific scriptures, I kind of view that as they are telling us that those scriptures are still relevant. Because we know at any point they could kind of just say these scriptures don't matter or aren't relevant. That's kind of like how they operate at the moment. So anything that gets brought up, I kind of view it as, oh, okay, right, that's still relevant. So him saying that is interesting because it means righteous dominion, that section of DNC, still fair game. So if we see
yeah,
unrighteous dominion in them, we can call it. The other thing he mentioned, Joseph Smith's inspired translation of the Bible,
yes.
Adam
I was like,
Clark's commentary.
I thought, when was the last time we had anyone quote the JST
Yeah,
at General Conference?
and he did, which puts it right back in the frame. It's out there, it's fair game. So we can all now go look at a BYU study that said there are so many parallels between that and Adam Clark's Methodist commentary. I think it was Methodist. Adam Clark's commentary on the Bible that Joseph Smith would have had access to, that it can't be coincidence and it is essentially plagiarism.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I
if
was,
I can find that study, I'll link it in the description.
yeah,
But it's excellent and it came out of the Lord's own university. So
yeah.
someone didn't get a temple recommend after that.
Well, speaking of temples,
Yes.
his whole thing was temples
Mhm.
again. Like,
Yes.
his whole thing paralleled the endowment ceremony and was all iconography from, you know, what Jeff said we didn't have, because the parable was of the king's marriage.
Mhm.
And basically, the king put out there invitations to his marriage ceremony, and he went on about how that's like the biggest thing ever in their culture. And everyone basically said to the king, I've got better things to do. And that those people were rebelling
Holland
against,
conference, isn't it? Really?
yeah, rebelling against royal authority, and they were had misguided priorities. And I'm like,
Mhm.
he wouldn't like my priorities, but I did come to your wedding feast. Um, so what did he do? He sent his servants out, just get anyone in off the street.
Mhm.
Just get anyone in. So they brought everyone in off the street, and then he's, yeah, so that they could be equals, everyone had to wear the same garment,
Mm-hmm.
which was the marriage garment. And he noticed one person in the back of the room not wearing the marriage garment. And it's at this point that I thought they took a bit of a liberty, because apparently the king went to the back of the room quite angry
Yeah.
and asked this person why they were not wearing a marriage garment. And apparently the scriptures say the person was speechless. Now they do the full Joseph Smith, and they take one word and then expand that one word into a whole book.
Mm-hmm.
Because speechless then becomes he has no excuses.
Mm-hmm.
He was, wrong, rebellious, a bad man. And he went on for a little while about what speechless meant. And I'm just like, maybe the guy was just like, the king's angry at me. I've never met him before. I've just been dragged in off the street. And now I'm being bollocked by the king. So I'm like,
I'm not sure I'd have any
speechless.
words.
Yeah.
But then he goes on to say, like, oh, he was actually like an intruder, an interloper. He'd snuck past the guards, right? Well, then he
Because
was
he was
pretty crap
speechless.
at it. He was pretty crap at it there because he didn't even bother to get a disguise. He
Yeah.
didn't even do a Nephi and steal some bloke's clothes that he's just beheaded.
Yeah. But
He didn't bother.
But he compared it all to basically, going. He spoke about angels, or no, he spoke about the sentinels at the door, that this person had snuck past them, as if
Yes,
we could sneak
sentinels.
past the angels that stand as sentinels.
Mm.
And he basically said that this person was in rebellion, and that the king, because he was speechless, cast him out, and that those rebellious people like us would
Mhm.
also be cast out, if we didn't have our wedding garment on.
Mm.
Mm,
Which is bad, very bad.
yeah.
And he didn't really say much else, to be honest, other than, we sacrifice our blessings for popularity, prosperity, and pleasure, which those things have been mentioned somewhat.
Yeah.
Technical issues sorted. Hang on.
And then he spoke about the JST, or the Joseph
Mhm.
Smith translation he was talking about, was many are called but few are chosen, and that basically
Alyssa
Alyssa, yes.
Gallion, I think that's how you say your name, asking the tough questions.
What if the person was
Well, the
mute?
person was mute. We didn't think of that very obvious explanation for, and the person was speechless.
Yeah, there's an email.
There's an email. There we go. Yeah, he didn't really say much else. I don't think.
No.
I don't want to give off Susan any more airtime.
No.
So let's go to the man who had a special ramiumptum erected just for himself, so that he could sit on it and still talk to his people. He started Russell M.
What-
Nelson. Go on.
Before he does,
Mhm.
something that stood out to me, the hymn right before, how great the wisdom and the love.
Mm.
The last word in the hymn is the word divine, and they dragged that word out, divine, the whole time he was being set up on his ramiumptum,
Mhm.
so that when the camera cut to him, he was there already, not like before.
Where was that?
But
There you go. That's it. There you go.
yeah, but I was just like, do you think they were all? I just felt like the word divine being dragged out whilst he was like put up.
Mhm.
I'm like, what? It's just hero worship, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Doug Vincent says it was a rammy rumptum because he was sat on it. Doug wins the pun of the night award.
Rami Rump. Whoa, there's still one session to go, but that's a contender.
I don't know if we're going to beat that. That's excellent. So he said, "I weep over your heartaches, disappointments, and worries." Do they? Because I'm pretty sure what they told all the people with worries and concerns to do was contact their state president, because they can't be bothered to deal with their opposing votes.
Mm-hmm.
So do they really? Do they really weep over our heartaches, our disappointments, our worries? Because I'm disappointed in you, Russell M. Nelson. I am disappointed in you. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. PD.
I got really excited. Not because I noticed just recently how big Russell M. Nelson's earlobes are. They're literally like half the size of his
And he
ear
just came.
again.
He came after Elder Bednar.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Susan,
because Elder
who
Bednar
has
doesn't
none.
have any.
Yeah.
And then, Russell M. Nelson, yeah, he's got massive
Which is
ones.
possibly why he commended that young lad for not marrying the girl who wanted a second piercing, because he's just jealous that he wouldn't be able to fit two in.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But I was hopeful when he started speaking about the fact that the daily news is very
Mm.
sobering, that we can be weighed down with what's going on. And I thought, here we go. He is going to address what's actually happening in the world. And then he segued to saying, but in the days to come, wonderful things are going to happen. He said that the greatest manifestations of the Savior's love and miracles, maybe that's not quite word for word, but he definitely said miracles, would happen in the days to come. And I was thinking, wow, this is going to be a week. Is he talking about, like the Savior appearing? Because if the greatest manifestation of the Savior's love was going to happen, and you read the Bible and you see some manifestations of raising the dead, raising himself from the dead and water to wine and all these miracles, but it's going to be even greater than that in the coming days. And I then realized after about 30 seconds after that he was just talking drivel and saying the coming days being an indeterminate length of time in the future.
Yes.
So
yeah, I've done, this is my 4th session now, so I got to the point where I'm actually just taking pictures of the closed captions on the screen, just for quotes, because my writing hand was getting sore. He talked about being accosted daily by an onslaught of sobering news. Cool. Are you going to do anything to address the church's part in resolving any of that? No.
nah.
Okay. But my dear brothers and sisters, so many wonderful things are ahead. Great.
Yes.
There's always this, oh, but we're going to be fine. So that's okay. Wonderful things are ahead for us. Cool.
But that's what he does in this whole talk. So a little while ago, he gave the old "no one can know true joy unless they remember the restored gospel," and he kind of did the same thing tonight, or this morning, wherever you are. But what he did was he didn't say joy. He was talking about rest. No one can know true rest.
Covenant keepers are entitled to a special kind of rest.
Yes. And that's the thing. That was his whole talk was about an extra covenant pillow. But his whole talk was about the fact that, yes, the world's in a really crappy place right now. But if you want rest from that, you can find it by keeping your covenants and making covenants with Jesus Christ, because of the strength of Jesus Christ. And for every covenant you make, you get a little bit of extra strength, so that those covenant makers and keepers get that special rest. And he had to go. Go on.
He talked about overcoming the sin-saturated, self-centered, and often exhausting world.
Yes.
And
he he spoke about people
Moats
leaving
and
the
comes to mind. Go on.
People leaving the church because it asks too much of them. And basically said, don't leave the church because it asks too much. If you're keeping your covenants, then there's a special rest there for you. But then he got to the old classic, after your sinful, self-centered world. And he said that, Jesus has suffered all and felt all, and he knows everything. And it reminded me of something that I've just seen on Facebook following the publishing of the new For Strength of Youth manual. And that was that in the sexual, I guess, health section, it speaks about same-sex attraction, and speaks about Jesus understanding that and having felt that as well. Now, that was a whole new level for me, because I thought, if Jesus had really descended below them all, then did he feel that? I don't know, like, it just seemed like they've brought a whole new dimension into the Jesus feels all, because if he felt all temptations, then did he feel the same-sex attraction? Did he feel all the other temptations that are morally corrupt? And you know what I mean? It was,
he listed a ton of them. He told us to take charge of our own testimonies and watch for miracles. Define a miracle, please, Russell Nelson, because if you leave that vague, find my car keys will be a miracle. Getting to work on time through traffic will be a miracle.
That's why he does it, though.
Charge my testimony.
Because he you know, the more vague, the more miracles.
Mm.
Because if it was like the Catholic Church, where miracles are a very defined thing, and to achieve sainthood, there had to be, is it 2 different miracles or something like that, that you'd
Not sure, but-
perform, something like that to achieve sainthood. But in the Mormon Church, miracles, like you say, are finding an extra 50 cents on the sidewalk so that you can get your Popeyes chicken for lunch. It is not taking young children off a trash heap in India because they search for food there. You know, it is not helping poor children who are being abused. It is just finding your car keys or the lost remote.
Yeah. And I think Alien Room makes a really good point. Russell Nelson sees Jesus as an example of how to save ourselves, not as a savior in the traditional Christian sense.
Yeah.
And that's a very, apologies, Americans, we've been giving it kind of, giving it hard to you tonight, sorry. But the essentially it's a very kind of American Protestant work ethic attitude type thing of work harder and it'll all be better. And I'm not denigrating that one way or another. I'm just saying that is where that attitude comes from. And when they say Mormonism is a particularly American religion, it's things like that that give it that name. It's because this idea of like, well, we have a doctrine of works because you just got to work harder. So you got to do, and it'll be fine.
I think
Jesus is an example of that. He worked harder than anyone.
Yeah, but this was the ultimate example of Russell M. Nelson raising the membership higher than the world. He constantly went on about overcoming the world. How do we overcome the world? He spoke about what does it mean to overcome the world, about being humble, which was rich, and then how do we do it? How does it help us and bless us? And he basically said, you know, Jesus Christ will elevate us above the world. And it's that whole superiority complex again, that I think they're trying to get people to re-entrench themselves in Mormonism and isolate themselves more from the world around them.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, we got an apostolic blessing.
Ooh, we did.
From the prophet.
Which was weird.
That's a weird part of, like, it's a weird part of his series of titles to kind of draw upon for his authority for that blessing. Why didn't he offer a prophetic blessing?
Well, I'd have been much happier if he'd have said Russell M. Nelson first in my name and then gone on with the Game of Thrones one. But yeah, why didn't he say here's a prophetic blessing? Because
here's my prophetic counsel. But the problem is when he invokes his office as a prophet, we can then hold him to what he says. And he doesn't like that, maybe?
Can apostles not be held to what they say?
Well, I mean,
they're all
my mind they can, because they're all prophet, seers, and revelators. But he
Yes.
is the prophet. But maybe that's why he spoke as an apostle, not as a prophet. Because as an apostle, like, you're just a follower of Christ. That's more, as a servant of Christ is what I'm saying, rather than as his mouthpiece. This is what I'm saying. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe he's just getting old.
Yeah, I think what Radio Free Mormon says, there's no office of prophet because he's the president. There's the president, and then there's the office of the apostleship, I'm assuming. But then all
why
of
didn't you
those,
give him a presidential blessing?
Because that just sounds stupid.
Yeah,
because
bad.
the correlation committee shot that one down immediately. But is apostolic
I offer you
blessing
a presidential blessing. It's like, nope.
Yeah.
Nah.
And he gets it confused with presidential pardon for all the child abusers in the audience. Sorry, go on.
Let's move on. Well, that's it. That's all we got. That's Russell M. Nelson. That's about as much we'll hear from him. I don't think we'll hear any more from him tomorrow, other than an obnoxious number of temples we don't need being announced.
I was going to say he needs to.
And if I sound cynical, it's because I am. And if I'm being a little bit too jovial, a little bit too glib about people's earlobes, it's because I've been up quite late, and I apologize. I don't have my usual composure. I shall try to regain some before the next halftime show, which will see a man who's in the audience currently joining us. It's not Peter Bleakley, because he's not here, because he's got better things to do than watch the other shows. But RFM will be joining us as well, along with Peter Bleakley. So imagine me, Nemo the Mormon, and a little RFM Peter Bleakley sandwich. It's going to be wonderful. And on that note, I'll see you in a few hours. Take care, everyone.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.